Hi everyone! In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to enhance your paint burst images using radial masks in Lightroom. First though, we're going to start by cropping. So when should you crop? You should crop if you have excess background distractions that you can crop out, or if things are looking a little bit crooked. So I feel like mine's just like a little bit off center, so I want to center my composition. You could also do the opposite and like off center it. But so I'm going to go ahead and set my ratio to 2:3 or 3:2 and just kind of take it in, get rid of some of the distractions, center my container, and that looks pretty good. Looks straight, but if yours isn't, you can also straighten yours. Otherwise, we're good and we can head into our masking options. So here's the mask on the toolbar. Now, what is a mask in Lightroom? Essentially, a mask is a way to select an area of an image that you want to change. And Lightroom has a lot of ways in which it'll select things for you. So if you're trying to select just the subject or the sky or the background or an object in your image, you can have Lightroom do it for you. Now this is powered by AI, which can be really slow on your devices, but it does a really good job. The rest though, the brush, the gradients, and the range masks are all ones that you can easily do yourself. So we're going to be using the radial gradient. And the radial gradient is radial. First, that means that it is round. We can make it to be oval or circular. And then a gradient means that something starts out being solid or opaque and then slowly becomes transparent and fades away on the edges. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to basically create a mask by clicking and dragging. The red that you see there is called a color overlay, so it's just showing you where your mask is. So obviously that was not where I wanted it. I want it to be over the jar. So I can drag it and I can move it and I can constantly change the size and move it around until I like it. And what's great about Lightroom is that you can do that at any time. Even if you exit out of Lightroom, you can still adjust the masks anytime you want. Now I'm just kind of covering my container and all of the paint. You might notice that you have two concentric circles here. This smaller circle is where the mask is the strongest, the most solid, the most opaque. The feathered area, which is this outer circle, is where your mask starts to kind of dissipate. Eventually it starts to end, it starts to disappear. So that it's a gradual change back to your original image. And you can almost see that here on the ends, that it's almost a very light pink instead of a bright red. So that looks beautiful. And now that I have made a mask, I can go over to any of these editing options and I can start to move the sliders around. And hopefully you can see that it's only affecting the area in which I've created a mask. All right, I think that looks great. All right, but before we edit the middle of the jar, we're actually going to edit the outside. But if we're using a radial mask, the outside of the image is not round. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to come up to invert here on the top right. And all that means is that we did now an opposite selection of what we just did. And so now I can like brighten or darken the background. And you can do whatever makes sense to you. I am probably going to brighten it because I used a white background, but I will show you a clip here in a moment where a dark background was used and dropping that exposure really helps. And it actually looks really cool in this photo too. So there's nothing wrong with going either direction, but I'm just going to show you two different options. So I'm going to go ahead and brighten my background. You also have options to like create contrast and change your highlights. You can even change the color temperature and get into effects. All right, but I think that is good, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. Now, in order to change the center, I actually need to make a completely new mask. So I'm going to create a new mask. I'm going to again choose radial gradient, and let's go ahead and make a new one. All right, and kind of the same idea. This time I might make it just a little bit smaller, just affecting like the color of the paint, or really just affecting the paint, I should say. Okay. Once you've got a mask you like, now we can start to make some enhancements. I do think that we need a slight exposure change inside of the container because it's looking a little dark. This might be a good time to add some contrast because what we're looking for is really like bright color, not too bright. You still want to be able to see like the texture of the paint and the burst. So you can like highlight some shadows though, or darken some shadows, highlight some highlights, shadow some shadows. You can also start to go into color though too. Color can be interesting. You can do an overall change of the image, but what actually is really cool is using the point color. So if you click here, you can then select a color like from your photo in the mask, and you can start to shift the color, whether you want to shift the whole hue. And it's going to be slight. It's not going to change something from red to green, but my red paint can start to fall more like magenta, or it can go a little bit more towards like orange. And I think the magenta pink color actually looks really cool, so I'm going to go that direction. Now this is optional as to change the color, but looks kind of cool in my case. You can also saturate the color. It might not look so good though to desaturate it. So I'm going to add a little bit of saturation and maybe a little bit of luminance. That will just add some light into that colored paint, and I think that really draws your eye. So those are all looking really great. I don't know that I need any more masks, but what I do want to change is something else going on this image. I don't know if you can see that there's kind of like this blue that's being reflected in the glass, and that actually is a really easy change. So I'm going to get out of my masking options, and we're just going to go to our general editing panel, and I'm going to scroll down to the color section, specifically the color mixer. So this like highlight of blue that's happening in the jar, I'm going to click on the blue option here, and I'm going to take that slider and just desaturate it. Notice that big difference. Instead of getting that blue reflection that must have been coming off one of my lights, I can completely take it away. So now that I just really have whites and blacks and pink in my image. And I think that looks really great. So what I'm going to do next actually is play you a clip from another edit to show you what the difference between editing maybe one of these with a light background versus a dark background looks like. Alrighty. Now I'm going to talk over this video. So here we go. So notice with this image, it's the same idea. We've got our clear container with our paint burst and a black backdrop was used. So the edit is just a little bit different. So here we are, we're going to invert the selection, and we're going to focus on the background, and we're going to drop that exposure. And notice the big change it does with a black background. It really takes away the background almost completely and really highlights the jar. And so here we're also like adjusting some of the other light options, maybe dropping the blacks a little bit more to make those dark values even darker. Now let's go ahead and make a whole new mask. This time we're going to make a mask just on the jar again. So make sure you add a new mask, hit Radial mask again, and let's go ahead and make another mask. And again, maybe a little bit smaller this time. Now we can make changes to the inside. So here I might again want to kind of darken some of the blacks, brighten the whites, drop some of the shadows. Again, that will kind of blend into the background, and it really makes the jar and the paint stand out. You have the option again to change the color, but in this case I think the purple looks great. So a quick undo with Control Z. You can up the saturation as well, but again, don't desaturate it. All right, now overall I think this looks really great. So the only other thing that I don't like is that area right there. It's looking very gray and odd. So we're going to add another layer mask there. Or sorry, not a layer mask, a radial mask. Notice it can go different directions. So we got like a horizontal mask here. And I'm going to drop that exposure, and you're going to see here that that area just kind of goes away. I felt like it was distracting. And now that I look at it, we're kind of seeing something similar happening on the bottom. So let's go ahead and fix that same issue, creating another radial mask at the bottom of the jar. And that will kind of eliminate some of those highlighted areas or areas that just have a distracting element. All right, I think that looks great. Now the very last thing we're going to do is similar to what we did to the other image. I see a lot of these like greens that are very distracting. So let's go back into the editing panel, go into our color mixer, and we're going to select the greens and the yellows and drop that saturation down so that now our image is fully black and white with just that pretty burst of that pink purple color. All right, guys, that's it. That's how you use radial masks in Lightroom with our paint burst project.